Many important programs are getting ready to send out their interview calls right now. Chances are, if you're watching this video, it is likely that you're going to get called for at least one of these programs. You've probably poured your heart into putting together a pristine application, starting from your personal statement and your CV, and all of the recommendation letters and school-specific questionnaires. Remember how hard you worked for it? Maybe we even worked with you on it. Whatever the case may be, this is the time you've been waiting for. The question is, when you get called for your interview, will you be ready to perform at the level necessary to gain acceptance for both the bench test and the interview? There's no doubt that there is a massive opportunity ahead of you. The 4 California schools combined provide the largest number of seats for international dentists. The number of applicants who get accepted during this time of the year is significantly higher than any other time of the year. That means that this is the best time to make your dream into a reality. But before you get too excited, don't forget that the competition during this time of the year is also higher than any other time of the year. For example, this one candidate comes to my mind. Not only did she graduate with top honors from her home dental school, she went on to become an orthodontist, and she finished her residency program. She did a combined residency and master's program, and then she became a professor. Oh, and I forgot to mention, during her residency, she was very deep into research, and she was very widely publicized in several journals, a lot more than I usually see listed on candidates' resumes and stuff like that. So she went on to become a professor, and while she was teaching, she also opened up her own office. And so she did both teaching and treating patients for 5 years. She only applied to the 4 California schools because she wanted to live in California. Candidates like this, I want to tell you that they're not common, but they actually are more common than you think. They're not the people that usually interact on forums. They're usually quiet because they do know that they stand out so much and they know how stressful this is, so they kind of stay back. But they are confident enough in their credentials that they're very picky about where they apply. And let's face it, California is a great place to live, and so a lot of people end up applying to just those 4 schools. Shooting for a California school this season is a smart thing to do, but you have to be ready for the challenge. I'm certainly not trying to scare you, but I do want you to be realistic about the obstacles ahead. Clearly, succeeding in this year's interview and bench test is going to require immense preparation and hard work. If you're one of the candidates that perform well during the interview and bench test, you're going to be starting a brand new chapter of your life. Come this November, you are going to be one of the lucky ones that gets to enjoy your winter and your spring before starting school, which leads to, in a few short years, you being able to work in the United States as a dentist. According to the most recent statistics published by the American Dental Association, a general practitioner in private practice on average earns over $180,000 a year. What's more is that a freshly graduated dentist, the average salary for a brand new dentist is $140,000. And besides the money, I mean, let's face it, entering the US society as a dentist comes with a lot of prestige no matter who you talk to. No wonder the US attracts so many dentists from all around the world who want to start their career here. I'm Dr. Alyssa Marshall, and myself, along with Kevin Marshall, have been helping international dentists get into a US dental program to achieve their dreams of becoming a dentist in the US since 2013. While the process of getting into a US dental school is difficult, you already know that, I don't have to tell you, we've been helping international dentists achieve that dream for the past few years. I'll be real with you, this is our 4th cycle working with international dentists, and by now we know what works and what doesn't for the bench test, interviews, and even for applications. We just talked about applicants that have a lot going for them in terms of credentials and experience and whatnot. But what about those who have a little bit left to be desired? Maybe their GPA wasn't very good, or they didn't have much experience from their whole country, or just life just got complicated. You know how life just goes by. I want to tell you about a client we worked with last year, and to protect her privacy, I'm just going to call her Priyanka. Priyanka was your typical dental student. She was average in school, she did okay. During the third year of her dental school, her mother, whom she was very close to, fell ill, and she struggled and failed a few classes and had to repeat the third year over again, which resulted in a year delay in her graduation. And she finished her internship and moved to the US because she got married. And when she got here, she knew what she had to do. She had to study and take the boards and all that kind of stuff. But she decided to focus on having her family first. And when she did, she realized that she didn't really have the familial support to help raise a child when the child was very, very young. And so she decided that she's going to be the one raising the baby, and so she went on to get a job as a dental assistant. She realized that she just couldn't juggle being in school and having the baby at the same time without the support. And then time just flew, and before she knew it, she had 2 children. She's been working at the same dental office for 7 years. 7 years as a dental assistant, and by that time, she was ready for a change. She had slowly studied for the boards by that time, and she had passed. And she did her best to put together her application and applied, and she even got one interview call. This interview call for her was her ticket to the changed life, the new life that she needed, that she deserved. But unfortunately, she didn't make it through. During the interview, she failed to convince the interview committee that she had what it took to get through the rigorous program. And during the bench test, she failed to perform at the competence level necessary to pass and surpass her competition. By the end of the year, she realized that she had wasted a whole year, and she realized that she needed help, so she came to see us. We worked closely with Priyanka through our online programs, and we were able to give her a lot of personalized feedbacks regarding her hand skills to get that level up to the place they needed to be, and also work with her on how to navigate the challenging questions that would come to her regarding her life and her professional life, and the 7-year gap and the 1-year failed attempt at getting into school, and all that kind of stuff. Priyanka walked into the 2 schools that called her for an interview, and she did really well. She was able to convince the committee that she had what it took to go through this program, and also perform well at the bench test, and she got acceptances from both schools. At the end of the day, she ended up choosing. She had a choice between which school to go to. What excites me so much about Priyanka's story is the fact that Priyanka was not a candidate that was tremendously compelling, let's be honest. She had 8-year gap. She had never practiced. She moved to the US right after her internship. And during those 8 years, all she really did was she just worked as a dental assistant. And even when she was in school, she was not the top student. She was a very average student. She had to repeat a year. She didn't do specialty. She didn't get a master's, and she had no clinical experience from her home country. She was a kind of applicant that many schools might have just turned away from. And despite that, through a lot of hard work and dedication, she was able to convince both the schools, the only 2 schools that gave her an interview invitation, that she had what it took. They liked her as a person. They were convinced that she had what it took, and she also performed highly during the bench test, much better than the rest of the competition, and she won her spot in both schools, and she chose which school to go to. Now, I tell you this because I want you to know that it is possible for you, no matter who you are, no matter what your obstacles are, you too can start your advanced standing program next year. Now I want to touch on a question that we get asked all the time, and that is, what are schools looking for when candidates walk in for an interview? If I had to sum it all up into just one word, that word would be interesting. Now, you may be wondering or thinking, well, I'm not very interesting, or I don't have anything extraordinary going for me. How do I do this? Now, candidates prepare a lot for their interview, which is great, but most candidates prepare in the wrong way, as if they are going to speak in front of an audience, when it really is an interview between just themselves and somewhere between 1 to 3 people. And often the responses they prepare are very generic and canned and boring, very similar to what the interviewers would hear all day long. You are more interesting than you think. That much I can tell you. And now Kevin is going to talk to you farther about how to bring out that interesting side of you and present it in front of the committee so that they are actually interested in you.
Hi, I'm Kevin, and right now we're going to talk about interviewing. Specifically, I want to talk about what makes you a candidate that stands out from the others. And so one of the concepts that we talk a lot here about at IDC is the concept of being an interesting candidate. And so if you've been to some of our workshops before, you may have heard us talk about this before. But it's really important to understand and to get the feel of, because you're going to need to walk into your interview. It's not just something that you can memorize. It's not just something that you can just kind of practice and practice. It's something that you have to really internalize. And it's a quality that's hard to express in words, but I'll do my best right now. We've all kind of met people in our lives that are extremely charismatic. You know, you can be at a party, or you can be at some sort of event. Maybe it's an academic event, and there's a certain professor that everyone loves, right? And all the students just kind of gravitate around. And maybe it's because that professor has charisma, and they're the ones that people actually pay attention to in class. Whereas another professor, they may be just as good skill-wise, but they don't have that same charisma. They're a lot more monotone, and their voice is very monotone, and they don't have that excitement. They're not resonating with their audience. And who's the one you want to go to class? Who's the one that you actually want to show up for that lecture? It's the one that makes you laugh, the one that's funny, the one that's interesting, right? All these things, and that's often, those are the professors that we remember decades later even. I still remember some of my professors back in the day, and the ones that really caught my attention, kept my attention. So this idea of being interesting is something that, the good news is it's something that you can develop. It's a skill that you can develop. You don't have to be born with it. The bad news is that it does take some work, and it's not like it's a simple like step-by-step direction. It's not like IKEA furniture where you can just follow along and suddenly you're there. You really have to internalize it as a quality. So I want you to think for a moment right now. I want you to take a little visualization trip with me, because the first step is to see what it's like and to experience what it's like on the other side of the interviewing table. Now, when I did a lot of interviewing back in the day at the university I worked at, a lot of people don't realize, a lot of candidates don't realize that it can be sometimes just as exhausting to be the interviewer as it is to be the interviewee. Now, it's true that the interviewee, or you, the candidate, is likely going to be a lot more nervous, so that's definitely the case. There's a lot higher level of nervousness than the interviewer has, but nonetheless, it's still a lot of mental work that interviewer has to go through. They have to do their best to pay attention, to keep attention on you, to ask follow-up questions to what you said, and to listen. It's really hard to listen. I don't know if I've been in many, in conversations where someone doesn't really let you talk and they're not listening to you. Most people are like that. Most people are not good listeners. They're good talkers, but they're not good listeners. So to be a good listener takes a lot of energy. So I want you to just kind of, maybe you can close your eyes, it's up to you, but just kind of come with me on a little journey, and we're going to imagine that you are, maybe like you're a faculty member at the program that you want to be accepted for, the advanced studying program you want to be accepted for. So you're here, you're a faculty member, and you know that today is the day where we're going to be interviewing all of the advanced studying candidates, or a good portion of them. Huge batch of candidates are coming through today, and you know that you have to give them your full attention. You have to take lots of notes. It's maybe 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you've just had lunch, so you had a big lunch, and you've been interviewing since 8 a.m., long day. You've already dealt with 10 interviews so far, 10 candidates, and now the 11th one is coming into the room, shakes your hand, and again, you just got back from lunch, and then they start, you ask them, tell me about yourself, and suddenly the candidate starts talking. They're not very excited, they seem really nervous, they don't look like they know what they're doing, they've never interviewed before, so they don't really have a good flow yet or rhythm. And suddenly they're talking about where they went to school, and they did 2 years of experience as a dentist, and they were a really hard worker, and they went to one of the most prestigious dentals. Suddenly it's just drowning out. You're just ready, you're dozing off. That's the food you had, everything is just kind of combining, and you just are doing everything you can to keep your eyes open. It's just like, really trying to listen. And also thinking about, oh my gosh, I forgot to pay that, water bill last week. I hope they don't, turn off our water. Now suddenly your mind's all over the place. Can you relate to that? Can you relate to, at least in your experience, if not an interview where you're an interviewer, but can you relate to maybe a patient that spoke to you and they're telling you their whole life story, and you're just kind of like trying to keep your attention on them, or a class that you took where you're trying to keep your eyes open during a lecture because the professor's so dull? You don't want to be that candidate. You don't want to be that 11th candidate, right? And so I appreciate you kind of going with me on that journey, because I want you to remember, or to think about when you're in that interview, what is it like to be on the other side? What are they going through? Because when we put ourselves in someone else's shoes, that's called empathy. And when you empathize and actually have that empathetic quality towards your interviewer, rather than a fearful, nervous, if it's just nervousness and fear, how effective are you going to be able to bridge that to go to the other side of the table and know and feel what it's like on their side? Then it becomes a service, right? Then interviewing becomes a service, because your job today is to make yourself an interesting candidate to that interview. And that's a gift to them, honestly. It's not just helping you, it's helping them. They want to actually pay attention. They want to have something to pay attention to. And so it's a kindness in a way. So there's a lot of ways to look at interviewing, and if we get out of our own little bubbles, which is where most of us stay, we have the power to really connect with someone. And interviewing is all about connection. It's all about what I like to call resonance, or resonating. I'm sure in your life you have connected with someone who's giving a speech, as I mentioned before, like a professor. But if you think about some of the great speeches in all history, you think about like a Martin Luther King, I Have a Dream, maybe you've heard that speech, and he's talking about, black and white kids at a playground holding hands. You can see the images, right? And you see this future that's a beautiful future where people coming from different backgrounds who didn't get along are now getting along. And what does it do inside? It feels good, right? You feel maybe goosebumps. You're resonating with that, unless you don't like that. But if most people do like that, most people resonate with that, and they feel very excited about a new future, and they feel very strongly about it, and they're brought up in terms of their energy. And that is called resonation. And that's what you're trying to shoot for as a candidate. And you can do that with humor. You can do that with talking about insights that you've experienced, that you've learned and gained over the years, that when you say them, it's going to click with them. Let's think of an example, because it's not just saying the things that we all know. because there's different layers of information, where if you just regurgitate what we all know, what's obvious, you're not going to resonate with them. It's not that exciting. If you just say, the sky is blue, duh, we all know that. If you say, it's good to be a hard-working person. People who work hard are great. They're great people. They're great candidates. They're great students. Great dentists. Yeah, it's sort of an obvious concept. So there's levels of obviousness that don't connect with people very much, and especially things like cliches. You got to be careful of cliches, because that's the dangerous part of an interview, is where you mention everything that you mention as a cliche. It doesn't excite people. It's not new information for them. It's not an interesting twist on new information or on old information. It's just the same regurgitated kind of talk. And so saying things like, here's where I went to school. It was a really great school. This is where I had a really fantastic work experience for 2 years, and I was very dedicated, and I saw a lot of different types of patients, very challenging for me. You're not resonating with that person. Number one, it's all about you. You're not really connecting with them in any way. It's just you're telling me. And the second thing is, it's not new information. It's all this cliche kind of stuff. So what we're going to be challenging you, and a lot of our courses talk about this, is we challenge you to get above the cliche level to the resonating level, where you start to begin to connect with that interviewer. And you can do that through like insights, for instance. You can talk about an insight that you had after maybe a year or two as a dentist, where you had an insight one day, you weren't able to communicate very clearly with your patients, and then one day you realized what patients wanted was a very detailed kind of experience, a detailed outline of what they were going to go through, what the treatment procedure was, and why. Focused on the why, because before it was just about the what. Here's what we're going to do, here's what you need. But then you began to explain to them the whys, and suddenly the patients perhaps started to pay attention. They started to become more agreeable. They started to be more on board with this treatment. And maybe you're talking about that to your interview, like, I realize patients need the why. That was my insight. Now that statement about patients needing the why, that's not taught in most dental books, right? Dental textbooks. It's not often, depends on your professor. It may or may not be taught by a professor, but that was an insight that you gained personally, that when you say it to another dentist who's had a lot of experience, maybe they didn't put it in those words before, maybe they hadn't thought about it that way, but suddenly it resonates with them, and they're like, that's true. I agree with that. Internally, they agree with you. And guess what happens? They become excited. That lifts them up. Suddenly, they're paying attention now. Whereas before, you were just saying what everyone else said. Now they're listening. And so you're helping them do their job better. You're helping them connect with you. And suddenly, you go from a candidate that just looked like all the rest to a candidate that's standing out, because you have that power of affecting their emotions. And that's really what mastering an interview and mastering interviews in general is all about, is learning how to say and act in a way that kind of creates certain emotions in your audience, and your audiences are your interviewers. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about what it means to be that interesting candidate in our next video, video 2. But we'll also be talking about the importance of knowledge. And so, it's not just about being interesting. There's a lot of interesting candidates, but they're not effective candidates, right? A lot of interesting people out there, but they're not great candidates. So it is a balance between interesting and also empowered by their knowledge. And so if you don't know some of the concepts about what an interview needs to be, the structure, the timing, what to say, what not to say, those kind of things, it's not going to do you much good. You need to have that ground, solid foundation to really be a strong candidate. So that'll be in our second video, and we're going to get to that later. Right now, I'm going to hand off to Alyssa.
A lot of us, myself included from several years ago, while we were in our dental school from our home country, we're not trained very rigorously in ideal preparations. We were taught it theoretically. So we knew exactly what everything should look like. We're very good at writing it all out or going through MCQ questions about ideal preparations, but we weren't really trained to produce those ideal preparations. Perhaps you were taught in a more clinically acceptable manner to produce preparations that were more practical and clinically acceptable, which is true for most countries around the world. If that was you and your dental school, then I want you to know that there's a lot of work to do to get yourself ready for the bench test. I also want you to know that it is possible to do so. I've worked with many people to get their hand skills up to where they need to be with our bench test mastery program. I also want to dispel one common myth that comes fairly often from candidates. I actually usually hear it from candidates who didn't make it through a year and then they come because they realize that they need some help. And they will often say something like this: well, I thought the pictures that I see in textbooks were just pictures and that there was actually like no way that that's what schools are looking for in terms of preparations. And my answer to that is yes, that is what schools are looking for. Those are not just photos, as those are absolutely possible standards for you to reach. It does take hard work, I'm not gonna lie, but that is what we have to work on during this time. Now that brings the question, do I even have enough time? Like, am I too late in the game? Do I have enough time? What if you haven't picked up a handpiece yet? What if it's been a while? What if you don't even know what materials you need to set up your home lab and you're just completely lost? What if you are just kind of shy and you don't know how to talk about yourself and you just get a little scared when you talk to a stranger? A lot of what ifs, right? I do want to say that yes, you do have enough time. Typically, you'll have 3 weeks between when you receive your interview invitation and when you have to go to the interview. I do want you to know though that we don't have a lot of time and 3 weeks is pretty short. So even if you don't have an interview right now, if you have the slimmest chance, if any of the schools that you've applied to, if there's even one school that has not given out an interview invitation yet, you need to start practicing hard now. A lot of applicants wonder, well, what if I never get an interview call? Like, what if I work really hard on it and I practice for my bench test and I practice for the interview and nobody ends up calling me? What a waste of time. No. I want you to get this very clear that you are not wasting your time whatsoever by practicing for the bench test. And I will tell you why and more about this in our next video, which yes, there is another video coming, yay. But yeah, no, I want you to know very clearly that you are not wasting your time by practicing at all. That practice is yours. It will always be yours, okay? And what is the best case and worst case scenario? Best case, you practice really hard, a school calls you out of the blue, you're ready for it, and you do really well, and you're done. Versus the worst case scenario, you wait. You get an interview call now, you scramble to get everything together to prepare for the interview, which, by the way, will take at least a week. You wasted a week, now you only have 2 weeks to practice. You go, you perform subpar, and you've wasted an entire year. And we have to get started with our applications again next winter when those who got accepted are enjoying their lives. So weigh those two options and please get started now. It will take a lot of hard work and dedication, but I promise you it's worth it. And we'll talk about more strategies to help you in our next video as well. We will let you know as soon as our next video is ready. We're working really hard on it. And in the meanwhile, I'd really appreciate it if you could do a couple of things for me. First, if you scroll down below, right underneath this video, there is an area for comments. please leave us a comment. Let us know what you resonated most with in terms of this video and what you're looking forward to for our next. The comments is really what helps us going. It's the juice that keeps us producing content like this. So if you've enjoyed it, please take a minute to let us know. We'd really appreciate it. And the second thing is keep an eye out on your mailbox so that you know as soon as the next video comes out that it's up and live. The next video, we're gonna share with you a ton of helpful and important and strategic information for you so that you can do really well in your upcoming bench test and interview. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. Really appreciate it, and we will see you next time.